There have been times when I have been invited to participate in interreligious conferences or events, which I've always been happy to do. And it seems to me that the purpose of these events is to discuss the similarities and the differences between faiths with the intention of enhancing understanding between different faiths. In other words, it's a good goal, because it's the sad fact that of the many conflicts in the world, religious conflicts are certainly up there at the top. We needn't mention which ones, but there certainly are lots of them. And this isn't a new phenomenon. People have been arguing about and fighting over religion for a long time. Until fairly recently, at least in the West, the idea was that you emphasize the difference and generally the superiority of your religion, not only over others, but over all others. We alone have the truth, all else is falsehood. In much of the world, that attitude still pervades. In the West, at least in the liberal parts of the West, this idea has been called into question. So whereas only 50 or 100 years ago the idea was all religions are different and you were out of step with the norm if you disagreed with that, now the tenor of the time seems to be all religions are the same, or they have their central core, their central values are the same. And if you're out of step with that, then you're not in the mainstream anymore. So sometimes Buddhists are asked, what's your view on this? What's the Buddhist view on this? Are all religions the same, or are they different, or what is it? So I'm going to give my perspective on this question, an important question. So, are all religions the same, or are their central concepts similar or the same? Well, if you look at the major world religions, I would say that it'd have to be Buddhism, Christianity, Islam. Judaism is always considered one of the major world religions, but in terms of numbers it's actually quite small. But for whatever reasons, it's considered one of the world's major religions. And then you've got smaller ones like Jainism, Sikhism, I forgot Hinduism. Hinduism is a major religion also. And then you've got really quite small ones like the religions of indigenous people, forest people around the world. And then there are religions that were dominant at one time but which have now faded into significance. Say the ancient Greek religion, the Roman religion, Zoroastrianism, which has almost disappeared after 2,000 years of being a major religion. And then you've got ones like Confucianism and Taoism, which some people say is a religion, other people are uncertain about that. But if you just look at the major world religions, you've got Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity. It seems to me that they have very important similarities, particularly in terms of their ethical values. So if you take traditional Christian values, I really can't see very much difference between what the Buddha said and what Jesus said. In fact, I think they harmonize each other rather well. For example, the Christian idea of love, or agape, has a bit more of an emphasis upon expressing that love in practical ways, like helping people in distress and things like that. Whereas Buddhism, although it does talk about that, it tends to look at love, or metta in this case, more from a psychological point of view and from an individual point of view. So a combination of those two together, I think, can make it right a creative harmony. And I think one of the values of interreligious meetings is that some of these issues can be discussed and become a part of people's understanding of what they can learn from other faiths and what other faiths can teach them. But then there are other things. So, for example, the notion of God. I would say that this would have to be, if not the central theme of, say, Christianity, then certainly one of the top 5 or one of the top 3. And it's very, very important. It all hangs on that. Whereas the Buddha really said almost nothing about God. Some people I've heard the Buddha said to be an atheist. So that conjures up images of people liking to Professor Richard Dawkins, and that being very aggressive in how he approaches the concept of God. And then that famous journalist who wrote a book called God is Not Great. So the central target of their critique was the concept of God. Because if you don't have that, you don't have Christianity. So the Buddha was not an atheist. I would describe him as a non-theist. So if you look at the central themes of Buddhism, what would be the central themes of Buddhism? Of all schools of Buddhism, I would say the Four Noble Truths. Suffering or inadequacy, suffering, the cause of suffering, the elimination of suffering, and how to eliminate it. Okay? And the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the fourth Noble Truth. How to overcome, how to transcend, how to heal suffering. Well, right understanding, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right mindfulness, and right concentration. That, I would say, would be the central doctrine of Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. There's more to it than that, but it all comes back to that in one way or another. And what you notice is, in those 8 steps, there's no right faith. Because it's not about faith, and it's not about faith in God. So it's not so much that the Buddha was against the idea of God, it just wasn't important. It didn't feature in his understanding of reality. And in fact, if you look at the other great ascetic teachers of the Buddha's time, the most important being Mahavira, the founder of Jainism. Well, Jainism is non-theistic also. Ajivakism, which became a major religion at that time and lasted for some centuries before it faded away, that too was non-theistic. And to the best of our knowledge, the other great or the other ascetic teachers who were attracting attention at that time, none of them were theists. So if you've got one religion that is based on the idea of a supreme intelligence, a divine intelligence, God, and you've got one which gives no importance to that, I think you'd have to admit that that is a very, very important difference from which many other differences come. Then, when we look at other, perhaps smaller religions, we find other differences. For example, concerning food. There's some religions which have got really complex food restrictions, certain foods that you cannot or must not eat, or some religions, in fact in some religions, alcohol plays an important part in the ritual, whereas in other religions, like Buddhism, for example, says that abstaining from alcohol is an important ethical practice. Now, people who believe that all religions are the same will say, oh yeah, but those things aren't important. But they are very important to those who believe it. To them, these things are primary, they're essential. So I think that, at least as Buddhism would see it, all religions are not the same. They may have some common features, but they have important and fundamental differences too. Now, I think it might be said that some people find that unhelpful. But it seems to me that if somebody is settled in their faith, that they are open-minded and accepting of others, they're tolerant of differences, we should be able to say, you teach and believe this, I teach and believe that. May you be well and happy, and may your path, your spiritual path, be a gentle one. And yet, I differ from you. In other words, it should be possible for a mature person to accept that there are different ways of looking at things, and not everybody sees things the way that I do, and that we still can be respectful and tolerant of each other. At least, I hope we can.